got out of the hospital in the Mayo Clinic, but she's back in. And she kind of did a little better, but then is not. So that's kind of where we on that. So she is still in need of our prayers. So let's keep that family in mind. Let me ask y'all something. When I say missionary, what comes to mind?
Teacher.
Teacher. Well, I like that. That was not what I was expecting. I didn't see y'all sneak in. How y'all doing? I'm glad to see you. Teacher. That's good. A lot of times when I hear the word missionaries, I think of guys like David French, who came and gave us a lesson a couple weeks ago. They're in Africa, in Zambia, putting together a school to teach preachers, and how, talks about all the difficulties they face doing that he is there. And I think of when we went to Mexico, we were with Dr. Henderson's son, James, and his family down there for a week, working down there. And one night we had been working, and then said, we're going to take a tour. And they were right outside of Mexico City, one of the suburbs of Mexico City. And James Henderson's wife, I cannot remember her name, but she works with women who are victims of domestic violence in Mexico City. And so they said, we're going to go through her neighborhood, and we'll show you where she goes down every day to work. And we went down there, we were in a van. I didn't want to get out of the van. I mean, that place was just, it was a scary place, a scary neighborhood. And she went down there every day to work with women who people were being violent towards. And that just amazed me. Those kind of things amazed me. One of the men we met when we were in Greece, his name is Chris Moore. And he now has 3 children. In the end, at that time, he just had 1, but he has 3 now. And they live on the island Lesbos, which is the first island. If you're a refugee leaving Turkey, that is the first Greek island you come to. It's about 17 miles from Turkey, and that's where he works in those refugee camps. He's a missionary there in those refugee camps, and he and his wife and 3 children live there all the time. And he sent out an email, and they were going to have, at the Greek schools, let out 2 weeks for Easter. So they were going to be out of school for 2 weeks. And he says, normally we would say we're looking forward to going to the beach and have spend some time on the beach. But in those waters between Turkey and this island, a lot of people, there's a lot of boats that they try to escape on that capsize. Sometimes people get thrown over the board. You hear stories over and over that you get in the middle of the ocean. And it's like, how much money do you have? And, well, you're going to give us that money or we're going to throw you overboard. And they didn't want to go to the beach because of the bodies that tend to wash up on the beach. And they didn't want their young children to be exposed to that. And there are other stories. Those are just some that came to mind. But when I think of missionaries, I think of those kind of people that I sometimes think of them almost as super Christians, that they're out here going into foreign lands, taking the good news of God to other people. But I want us to think a little bit that every one of us has a mission. Every one of us. We may not be going to foreign lands, but as we go to work, as we go to school, as we go to the store, the table of knowledge, or wherever we go, as we go, we have an opportunity to be missionaries. That we have an opportunity to teach. That by our lives, by what we do, by what we see, and who we talk to, we have an opportunity every day to be missionaries. And we are, whether we want to think about it that way or not, but we are. So let's remember that. And as you may have guessed, we're going to be talking about the Great Commission today at the end of Matthew. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 28, starting in verse 16 through the end of the chapter, through the end of the book, actually. This is Christ has been crucified, and then on the 3rd day, Mary Magdalene, the other Mary, they go to the tomb, and it's empty. But they see the angels, and the angel says, you go tell the apostles, you 2 women, go tell the apostles to tell them to go to Galilee, and they will see Jesus there. And then as they're leaving, they see Jesus, and he says, you go to the apostles, and you tell them to go to Galilee, and I will see them there. So we have these 2 women who are instructed, you go tell the apostles. And so then we get to verse 16, and they are in Galilee. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had directed them. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, to the very end of the age. Now we see this, that Jesus has told them to go to Galilee, and they go to a mountain, and they see Jesus there. That is where they know to go. I don't know necessarily the significance of going to the mountain, but when you look at the book of Matthew, and you look at Jesus' ministry in Matthew, you see over and over it occurring on a mountain. That when the devil tempts him, when he goes into the desert and the devil tempts him, he takes him up on a mountain. When Jesus gives his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, he's on a mountain. We see that he goes up on a mountain for the Mount of Transfiguration, that he goes to the mountain to pray by himself. He goes to a mountain to pray with his disciples. And here, when he gathers them, they are gathered on a mountain. Now, I don't know what all the significance is, but one of the things is, I think, that when we see in Matthew something occurring on a mountain, it's telling us, pay attention. We see so much happen on a mountain, pay attention. And I like to think, many times people either like to go to the beach or they like to go to the mountain. I like to go to the mountains. And so that pleases me that Jesus liked to go to the mountains also. And I know that he called fishermen and he spent time around the lake and all that also. But I like it that it's on a mountain. And let's pay attention that when we go to the mountains, that we can see the Lord. We can see his glory. We can see his beauty. And we can be in a space to seek the Lord, just like Jesus did. That he went off by himself to learn. But let's remember, as we look at this, what it says. These are people, the 11. It's very clear, it's the 11. Judas is not there. And when they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. But some doubted. These are the people, these are the men that have been with Jesus for 3 years. They have seen him heal the sick, raise the dead, feed the 5,000. He has given them the preaching. He has called them. They have seen him die on a cross, and here he has risen. But some doubted. And I find that to be an amazing statement. And what do we make of that? When it says that some doubted, you remember what Jesus said to Peter when he's walking on the water? Jesus is coming across the lake, walking on the water. And Peter says, Lord, if it's you, call me to come to you. And Peter gets out of the boat and starts walking to the Lord. But then Peter sees the waves and he begins to sink. And the Lord saves him. And he says, why did you doubt? That's the accusation. Why did you doubt? And we see that. And we see this. That some doubted. And kind of what comes to my mind when we hear that these guys who have seen so much, have heard so much, have experienced Jesus so much. Some doubted. And we don't know exactly what they doubted. It doesn't tell us that, just that they doubted. Do they doubt that something about Jesus? I don't know. But they did. Remember in Matthew 25, when Jesus is talking, and he separates them left and right, the sheep and the goats, and some of them he says, depart from me. I never knew you. And that's kind of what I'm expecting here. That when Matthew tells us that some doubted, I'm expecting Jesus to do something here. Y'all need to go over there. Or at least to criticize them. At least to criticize them like he did with Peter. But what does Jesus do here? He gives them the exact same assignment. He gives it to those that believed and didn't doubt. And he gives it to those who did. He doesn't say, I'm talking to you, only to you ones that believe. He doesn't do that. And then he says, you that doubt, I'm going to give you other instructions. He gave the same instructions. Go and tell, make disciples. And that many times I think of doubt as a weakness. But then other times I think that doubt is something that we all have. We all have times when we're up and sometimes we're down. Sometimes our faith is strong, other times it may be weak. And that's part of being alive. That's part of being human. And sometimes it's good to see that these guys that have been through so much still had doubts. And one of the things that if you have a doubt that teaches you don't know everything. And I think that's part of doubting is you have to realize I don't know everything. And if you can recognize and you can accept that I don't know everything, that will help you to look and listen to others. Because maybe I can learn something from that person. If you have absolute certainty in who you are and what you're doing, you can't listen to anybody else because you already know everything. And so you can't learn. And so I think one of the things, if we think about doubting, let's remember that Jesus gave the same assignment to those that doubted, to those that didn't. And there's something to be said for that. That if you have doubts, remember that God didn't give you an out. Okay, well you doubt, you don't have to go to work. You doubt, you don't get this assignment. They did. So even in your doubts, God is calling on you to go and make disciples. And if you do, working for the Lord cures a lot of your doubts. As you learn about the Lord, as you invest yourself in doing His will, you learn and you become less doubtful. That doesn't mean you're going to learn it all. But I think that one of the things that makes these men stronger is their proceeding as God wants them to do, as Jesus has instructed, even with their doubts. And so when we are faced with doubts, one of the things to do is to look around and how do we serve? How can I serve my community? How can I make disciples as we go forward? As we look at this and we see that Jesus did not give them a break because they doubted. He didn't criticize them. He didn't give them a break. He said, go, make disciples. But He also says that all authority has been given to me. And when we think of authority, again, what do you think of when you think of authority? Many times I think we have the idea sort of like the old Roman Empire. They had authority. They had the authority of death. That if you disobey us, we'll either bring in our armies or we'll bring in our guards and we can hang you on a cross or we can destroy your country. We have violence. And that violence and that strength gives us authority. And that was the threat that they had. And we still see that sometimes. We still see it today. Well, I know it's not, we don't hang people on crosses and things like that. But if you fail to pay your taxes, eventually somebody with a gun is going to come up and take your stuff. That's going to happen. It's still, our authority still has that backing of violence. Even though it's not as bad. I don't mean to say that. But it's still there. In my courtroom, when I tell someone to do that and they say they throw a fit or something, somebody with a gun is going to go talk to them and say, you need to leave. It is still that threat of strength, that threat of violence that has authority in the empires of the world. And I think sometimes when Jesus says, all authority has been given to me, we are thinking of that kind of authority. But Jesus has just spent His ministry and His life showing that my power, my authority is not based on violence. He submitted to violence. He gave His life to show that His authority is not based on violence. It's based on His giving. It's based on His giving His life. And when He says all authority has been given to me, He is not saying that I'm going to whoop you if you don't obey. He is saying I am giving you the freedom to go forward with my word into the world. That this is what makes a difference. That this is what life is. And we want to remember that. It's not a threat of death. It is a promise of life that Jesus' ministry is based on. When we look at this Great Commission, and it talks about go. And they did. The Apostle Paul, we know his journeys. We know that many of these apostles that Jesus is speaking to here, they scatter out and they take the word all over the place. But we also have that opportunity as we go, as you go, to make disciples. Sometimes we just look at this as going. Let's just go. And that's not the imperative here. The imperative that Jesus is giving is make disciples and teach. You know, when Jesus sent out the 72 apostles earlier, the first commission, he sent them out. And what did he tell them? I'm giving you the authority to cast out demons, to heal the sick, to do this. But one of the things he doesn't say is he doesn't say teach. Now, I'm sure they did do some teaching, but that's not what he gave them the power to do. He gave them power to do, like I said, cast out demons and heal the sick and do those kind of things. And here he tells them, go make disciples and teach. And I think that is something we sometimes forget. We have that go and we go straight to baptize. And we should. I mean, I'm not trying to lessen baptism by any means. But it's also teach. It's also make disciples. And one of the things David French, when he told us, you know, if you just want to baptize, we can baptize people all over the place. But then they're not going to be faithful. They're just going to be baptized and go on. And I really like his approach, David French, is that we want to teach these people to be disciples and to be disciple makers, and that they will be able to make their way in the world. It's a holistic approach. And I think that's what Jesus is telling us here. Make disciples, teach, and be baptized. Baptize them into Christ, into his death, and into his resurrection, and into his teachings. Because that's one of the things he says. Baptize and teach them all that I have taught you, which is part of that disciple making. That is part of that fulfilling the Great Commission. It's not just getting people in the water, which is very important, but it's also continuing on to teach. Now, one of the things I want you to do, I want you to look to your right and to your left. See who's sitting next to you. And I want you to realize that whoever you looked at is a missionary. Everyone. When you look to your left, there was a missionary. You look to your right, there was a missionary. Every day as you go to work, as you go to the post office, as you go to eat, you are a missionary. And you are teaching God's word in the way that you live, in the way that you talk, in the way that you teach. But I know you look to your left and your right, but I also want you to kind of do this. That I am a missionary. I have a mission from God to go and make disciples. And one of the things I love, when we look up here on the board, we see 55, that makes me feel good. That encourages everybody. But I want you to understand sometimes that disciple making may not occur in this building. Everybody you bring in, I'm thrilled. But it may occur between you and them individually. It may occur in the conversations that you have. It may occur in that relationships that you have. And if you can get them in here, we would love to see them. But don't get the idea that that's the only way that you could make a disciple. It may come down to you and them one-on-one making a disciple. And that's what the Great Commission tells us to do. But we also see in here, and this is one, I skipped this one. This is going back to doubt. This is one of my favorite verses. The father of the sick child, who's brought his child to Jesus, and immediately the father of the child cried out and said, I believe, help my unbelief. I relate to that so much. I believe, but Lord, help my unbelief. Help me to grow. Help me to do better. And so that's one that goes with the doubt portion. But I also want to point out that in this Great Commission, that he tells us, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. And that's something that is not new and unique to this statement. We go all the way back. This is on the mountain where the devil took Jesus up on the mountain. And he said, I will be with you. That's what God said to Moses back there in the desert when he's trying to get him to go lead the children of Israel out of Egypt. God promises Moses, I will be with you. Even though Moses was very reluctant. He says, I don't have that ability. I can't do it. And God says, I will be with you. And then in Jeremiah, when Jeremiah is being called by the Lord, and he says, do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you, declares the Lord. I am with you, is what he promises to Jeremiah. That's what he promises the apostles here, that I will be with you. And that's the way the book of Matthew ends, is I will be with you. But we also have the way it begins, back there in Matthew 1:23. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which means God with us. So we see there in the very beginning of Matthew, God with us. We see here at the very last verse of Matthew, I will be with you. And so when we look at this, that when we look at being missionaries, wherever we may be, let's remember that God is with us. That it is His strength, not ours, that gets things done. It is God's mission, and it is God with us that gets things done. Let's remember this as we go forward, and let's remember that not only are we making disciples, leading people to Christ, but we are also disciples being transformed daily. That when we have our doubts, we go forward. God can handle our doubts. He just can. When people come to Him and talk to Him, as long as we are searching the Word, as long as we are searching for God, God can handle our doubts. Let's not knock ourselves down. Let's be ready to go forward. It could keep us humble a little bit, having a few doubts. Let's remember God's authority. That God's authority is based on His love. Let's remember that we are to go and make. As we go, as you go every day, there is someone out there that is watching. There is someone out there who will listen. And let's remember that as we go. And as we prepare to take of the Lord's Supper, let's remember God's work here on earth, His mission. Remember Christ on the cross. Let's remember His teaching, as He says right here. Teach them all that I have taught you. And let's remember to do that. It sometimes can seem quite daunting that we go through this. What difference can I possibly make? And that's an all right question. It's an all right question to ask God. And I think God's answer is you don't know yet. When He talked to all these guys, they didn't know what they were doing. Some of them doubted. And yet, think of the impact that they have had on the world. And think of the impact that we can have, right here, just us, can have on our community and our world. And let's remember that we are missionaries, each one of us. There's not divided up, each one of us. If you have a need, if you want to put on the Lord in baptism, to begin that walk with Him, to be immersed with Christ, and to come up in newness of life, to walk with the Lord, we encourage you to do so. If you have a need that we can help you with, or if you have a need that you just want us to pray with, if you would come as we stand and as we sing.